Well, so we love talking about um, businesses. We love talking about your business specifically. Welcome back from back in episode 001. So, of course, we're doing book club
Yeah.
as well. So here's our team of rivals right there. Yes, you got the hard copy, the hardback. I love that. It's just this a softback in a book this substantive is a little schizophrenic. It's a little like not
I
not
agree.
not it's not represented right. Softback, but anyway,
There's a regalness to the hardcover.
That's right.
It kind of goes with the
yeah,
the book.
that's right.
I agree.
Well, so what are you getting out of the book so far? Where are you at on it?
How far in?
Mhm.
3 chapters.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's maybe 120, 30 pages.
Mhm.
Very meaty read,
Yeah.
for sure. I think the overwhelming sense of the background is very humbling. Just the meager scenarios of the 4 men that are
Yeah.
put together. It's just,
Yeah.
if you think you're having a bad day or having a tough go
Yeah.
in life and
Yeah.
things aren't going the way you want them,
Yeah.
that would be a real good chapter to read, just to resettle into
Yeah.
tragedy, pain, which it underscores the thing that you and I have shared a bunch, and I don't know where to attribute it to, but the idea that hard times make strong men
Mm-hmm.
and women. But the idea in the chapter is, goodness, from where they came,
Yeah.
it's a shock.
I found it interesting how different. Well, they all had all 4 of them. Well, and so there's a little bit of review. The author Doris Kearns Goodwin is in the first, well, I'd say part of the book. She's doing a first half of the book, doing a ton of background, especially these first 3 or 4 chapters. Background on these 4 players. These 4. Well, the premise of the book is these 4 guys go to the Republican, the first Republican primary.
Yep.
Because it was just developed.
That's right.
Right.
And Lincoln was the founder of the Republican Party of Illinois. The other guys had different party affiliations and ended up at the Republican thing. But but it's really the story of these 4 guys running for nomination, and then how Lincoln beats them, and then of course gets elected in 1860, and brings those other 3 guys into his cabinet, and that's the title, Team of Rivals. And it's really, really fascinating how different they are, even though they have very similar, very similar tragedies and so
Yeah.
forth. But one of the things that jumped out at me right away was that Lincoln was very different from the other 3. The other 3 had a ton of education, ton of I don't know. Well, education for sure, and then perhaps means like wealth of some sort, or at
Yeah.
least history of that. Was it Chase? Got pretty poor at one point in his childhood, but he still had
Yeah.
opportunity and serious education stuff. But good old Lincoln had nothing.
He had almost no bright spots. That
Yeah.
really came through.
Yeah,
That chapter 1, so having read 3 chapters,
Yeah.
it's fresh.
yeah,
Chapter 1 is basically a study on where those men were that day of the nomination. And then chapter 2 is their 4 stories up until the point they got into politics. And then 3 is their journey in early politics before the nomination. So so far it's been all backdrop
Yeah.
that I've read.
yeah,
But yeah, the idea that so much strength and wisdom and intelligence could come from such meager means is a real testament
yeah,
to the American nation and the dream that I
Yeah.
think she already underscored
yeah,
several times. The idea that with an intellect and will, there should be no limit to what
Yeah.
a man can accomplish.
yeah.
And, it really
Here's a
comes
little
through.
something from chapter 3. This is the introduction, I suppose, to chapter 3. In the only country founded on the principles that men should and could govern themselves, where self-government dominated every level of human association from the smallest village to the nation's capital, it was natural that politics should be a consuming, almost universal concern. And it's interesting. I don't know that. I mean, politics is a big deal now, but I don't think it's as big a deal now as it was then. I don't think we're. It's almost like we're too far from the, if you will, the miracle of our founding.
Yeah,
You know,
I agree.
I don't feel like I'm mildly interested. I've been more interested at times in politics, but I'm just not. I mean, I think it's super important who we elect and all that, but I just can't seem to muster up more than a mild interest and a determination to go vote.
When it is a big deal, it's not for the same reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Not to the same reasons as these guys. Yeah.
It's more hype.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was a lot of civility, too, to the discourse. They talked about the newspapers and the men who were writing for the Democratic papers versus the Whigs or the liberation parties, and how they socialized and collaborated and had a lot of things in common. It wasn't unthinkable that they would be sitting around having a conversation and debating it and then go home and be friends or be a part of the same community and not be bitter rivals. Where today it's a real private thing. You know, your politics are not something that are really able to be discussed in a public forum without it getting, for fear that it gets too heated, you know, or like it's just too much for that social context to discuss.
Right?
Yeah.
It's somewhat risky to be, hey, here's my
Here's what I think about that.
here's my plank, if you will. So yeah, that's interesting. I wonder. It seemed like also they were malleable. I mean, they've at least the Republican Party was a reforming of like 3 or 4 parties. Whigs wasn't that the oldest one, I think, if I remember right. But I had it written down here: Whigs, the Do Nothings, the
Free Soilers.
Free Soilers. That's right. Like, hey,
That's a cool one.
somebody should have done a take 2 on that one.
Right.
You're like,
That's-
"Here, what about the Free Soilers? You know, the Know Nothings, the Whigs, the Free Soilers. Seemed like there's one other one in
Descriptive.
there. Yeah. But yes, so, but malleable almost. And there's I don't remember which one it was. Chase changed parties a couple times and kind of had a reputation of it didn't serve him well that he changed parties a couple times. But I remember there's one particular set of letters where one of his buddies was like, yeah, you changed parties, but I still love you. And, and it was very, I don't know if amicable is the right word, but heated and intense, but still everybody understood that this is a malleable situation, it seemed like.
There was one sequence where I think it was in New York, there was a Democratic newspaper that she quoted about, it was one of the Republican candidates, and it was very eloquently and kindly written. You know, even though his persuasions were different, it was written in a way like, this is an admirable man who is electable.
Yeah.
It wasn't like,
Yeah.
because he disagrees about these few issues, he's despicable and couldn't be considered, which was printed in the newspaper,
That's
which
right.
is like it's incredible to think about that being in the consciousness of the people in that time.
Yeah. It's kind of like they said, we don't want you to elect this guy, but we have a hard time not liking him for these reasons.
Yep.
You know, like, oh, that was cool.
Yeah.
Another thing that stood out to me was how papers were, like they said, all right, this is a Democrat paper. Now we're going to give you the news.
Yep.
You know, they came right out with, here's our
that's a
alliance
good point. I didn't think
affiliation
about
and all that. And now it just seems like, it's like, you know, we kind of, it's like the folks try to keep their affiliation under wraps, and it doesn't work. I mean, it's like, you know,
on either side.
That's why I like the Epoch Times, by the way.
Yeah.
I suppose there's some other paper I should probably like as well, but you know, the Epoch Times are like, hey, we are conservative, we love America, we hate communism, we came right out of Tiananmen Square, China, blah blah blah. China should be dealt with in a very robust way. Now here's the news. You know,
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, now I get it. I see where you're coming from. So I like that.
There's a word at least in my case, have not been used to using the word charity outside of charitable giving or charities, but the idea of treating people with charity or maybe the benefit of the doubt and assuming there's a good person there and you just disagree
Yeah.
for different reasons.
Yeah.
Being charitable that way seems to be a lot more reticent in that time.
Yeah.
Even though it, like you said, there may have been more passion, true, like real passion about buy-in and care for the young country at that time, but it was still, I think the read I got was much more civil. One of the other things that really stood out to me, speaking specifically of Lincoln as she's building the story, is his ability to sympathize and calling that out as being able to relate to what someone else was feeling or thinking and how that impacted his presidency. But
Yeah.
it was like a superpower. We sometimes, when we're interviewing
Yeah,
somebody, we'll ask
right.
like, hey, what's your superpower? If somebody were to put it to you that way, what's the thing about you that really resonates with your friends or family? And it seemed like sympathy is the thing with him that really came through.
Yeah.
Which there was a
Yeah.
touching letter he wrote to some daughter whose dad had died in the Civil War, and just how he could relate to the plight she felt, and took the time to write several paragraphs of like, sorrow has reached your household and I'm so sorry for that. And you could just tell it was kind of him writing it, probably crying or,
meant
feeling the emotion of it. Yeah.
It wasn't politics and PR and all that, for sure. Yeah, that was interesting how, and I would say I would use the word empathy maybe as where he was good at putting himself in somebody else's shoes. There was I don't remember which chapter this was in, but how he took the southern approach, or at least he said, hey, these folks in the South, slaveholders, have a lot at stake. And if this thing goes away, this slavery thing goes away, here's how it's going to hurt them. And here's why they're having a hard time dealing with this. And let's understand that. He was sympathetic to that, and some people didn't like him because of that, because he wasn't hard edged. Like this on the Seward side, Seward kind of took the abolitionist side pretty strongly, and so did what's his name, Chase.
Yep.
Bates, it was funny. Bates, the third guy, was pretty ambivalent about slavery. And he was almost like, some folks have them, some folks don't. Let's not get too bent out of shape about it. You know what I'm saying? And Chase is like, it's not in the Bible, essentially. And Seward was pretty close to violently opposed to it.
Yeah, which it seemed that their experience had shaped. Chase being a lawyer in Ohio and dealing with the laws about returning slaves to the South once they escaped to Ohio, being on a border of a slave state. And it was a really poignant story that was told about Seward and his wife. I think, was it Seward and his wife took a trip in the South, and they saw the abuse saw like a line of 10 slave boys and girls being abused and just being put to sleep on a dirt shed and just crying themselves to sleep, and just you see something like that, and that'll change your desire when you get back home to stump for rights and changing the world. But if you haven't seen, I'm sure the South tried to, whether through the newspapers or just debating, probably tried to paint it in its best possible light. And what it did for families, and it all works together. It was seems like the sound of the day.
Yeah.
They didn't buy it. In
No.
particular, those two. And then Lincoln.
Yeah. Well, it's so far it's a great read. We're a couple of chapters ahead. We're getting up on, I think how far have you gotten?
I finished 6. but I went back
Yeah.
because I couldn't remember people. So I went back to halfway through 5,
So,
and I'm
Brandon,
listening again.
what's your favorite name so far? Or most colorful? Any names stick out? You're like,
man.
what the heck?
There are some that stick out.
What were your parents thinking?
Thurlow.
Thurlow Weed.
Thurlow
is the
Weed.
one.
Yeah.
That's a great one.
Yeah, and that you can't help but come away from those early chapters and not hear about the relationships that these candidates had with their like second in commands or campaign leaders or best friends.
Yeah.
The way that they wrote letters to each other, the way they spoke to each other, and I thought she did a good job of explaining like how we might interpret that in 2022 versus how it would have been interpreted in 1850.
Yeah.
But
That's right.
but yeah, it's passionate language.
Yeah.
Which is a little awkward today.
Yeah,
right.
to read that, it's
Yeah.
like, wait a minute. I mean,
Right.
you're just kind of like thinking about the reality TV show version of those words rather
Yeah.
than
Yeah. Well, that one, what was the guy's name? Speed. Lincoln's best buddy
yeah.
in his youth, like early, maybe he's in his 20s and 30s or something like that. And they were talking about, like, and folks have written, like, well, he must have been gay because they were sleeping in the same bed and all that. And she was like, look, they all slept in the same bed because there's one bed and 3 guys, and that's just how you did it in the boarding houses. Is there weren't many beds.
Plus, it was expensive.
Yeah.
Yep.
You had to have a lot of money to have your own bed.
Yeah.
She was fairly, I think, I feel like she was fairly left it like, well, he might have been, but what does it matter?
Yeah, right.
It's kind of like, who cares?
I think she basically ended a sentence with saying like they just weren't as obsessed with sex as we are today.
Yeah. Yeah.
The idea of like, well, what happened?
Yeah.
It's
Nunya?
That's not. Yeah, I mean, it was never written, and it seems like they wrote everything.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's just different.
That's one of my takeaways too so far is like, wow, these people were writing up a storm,
Yeah,
and were they using, so I have here, you recognize
it's
it?
a good one.
Yeah, that's a good pen.
There's this pen, by the way, I got from Brandon Kinney years ago. Do you remember when was that? It's been like 7 years or something.
Probably. Yeah, it's probably been that long.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ink in that thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it takes the G2 Pilot insert, so it is very hefty. I don't know if you can see that up there. Yeah. But at one point, I'm thinking about their pens because one of them was off somewhere and was writing. I think it was Bates was off somewhere and writing constantly, like every day to his wife, and she was writing to him, and it was Bates, by the way, that they described his office or his work day,
Yeah.
and he had this desk, and he
Yeah.
smoked 6 cigars a
Yes.
day. I'm like,
Basically lit
Man.
the next one off the
yeah,
one. Yep.
that sounds like a good day.
I don't know
Now-
how you could
Started early.
That'd be good. You have to build up a tolerance to that.
Yeah. Well, there's that saying you can't drink all day unless you start early or something. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
It's not a very smart thing to do, but it was interesting how much like that desk was set up so he could write and pound out letters. I'm like, man, that like what do you like? I make mistakes all the time when I'm writing and I'm scratching stuff out.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, man, I don't have I would need like whiteout, I would, like, oh shoot, and I just can't, I don't have the discipline to scroll out a bunch of well thought out verbiage linearly without botching it up.
Right.
You know what I mean? That was very interesting to me.
And if I may say, no insult intended, those men were more intelligent than you and me.
Yeah.
They read everything and memorized whole sections,
Crazy. Yep.
whole plays and whole books of the Bible and
Yeah.
whole, comedic acts. And like when you train the brain
Yeah.
10 times the ability that we do,
Yeah.
you end up probably having to use less whiteout.
Here's your pen and here's your whiteout. Great. It's interesting. I don't know if we'll have the intelligence to look back, but at some point, I mean, here we are looking back going, hey, this digital experiment, how's that going? And our forefathers are going, not well, stop, kill your iPhone. But someday, I don't know if like we look back on horse and buggy and like, yeah, that must have been terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but really, I mean, they're, it's pretty convenient to drive around, but there's something lost there with
No doubt.
the old school stuff.